Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Metcalf. I am an Education Programs Assistant, or EPA, in the Language Policy and Leadership Office, or LPLO, in the Multilingual Support Division, or MSD, at the California Department of Education, or CDE. Today, we'll be exploring how we can maintain the promise of our state's exit criteria while ensuring we meet the needs of all of our EL students, including those with disabilities. We have a panel of experts from various divisions and organizations who will guide us through the current reclassification process, share best practices, and introduce some exciting new tools to support this critical work. Before we dive in, I'd like to say thank you all for your dedication to supporting English learners. Your work is critical in ensuring that these students have the best possible educational outcomes. To begin, there will be opportunities to ask questions during today's session. Please submit your questions in the question and answer or Q&A feature. Now, let's review the objectives for today's webinar.
Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we need the slides up. I don't know if others can see it. Can everybody see?
Yes, slides good on this end.
Thank you, Alicia. Okay. All right, looks like we're good to go. Thank you so much, Alicia. All right, let's review the objectives for today's webinar. We'll be discussing the reclassification process for our 1.1 million EL students, including duly identified students or EL students with disabilities. These numbers highlight the scale and importance of this process in our state. We're excited to introduce to you the Observation Protocol for Teachers of English Learners, or OPTEL, a tool that can satisfy criteria 2 and 3 for reclassification. This tool brings equity and consistency in the reclassification process. We have experts from the field who will share their experiences and best practices. Their insights will be invaluable as you refine your own reclassification processes. These objectives reflect our commitment to providing you with both the knowledge and tools to effectively support your EL students through the reclassification process. Please remember, reclassification is not just about numbers or meeting criteria. It's about ensuring that all EL students have the skills and support they need to succeed in their academic careers and beyond. Now let's take a look at our agenda for today's webinar. We have a comprehensive program that will cover all aspects of the reclassification process. We'll start by introducing our expert panel. Each presenter brings unique insights and experiences to this discussion. We'll then situate our discussion within the broader context of California's EL roadmap. This will help us understand how reclassification fits into our overall strategy for supporting EL students. We'll review the current landscape of EL students in California, including key demographics and trends. Data will inform our decision throughout the webinar. We'll explore the range of services available to both EL students and students who are duly identified. Understanding these services is crucial for effective reclassification. Criteria will be the core of our presentation. We'll examine each criterion in detail, including the standardized criterion 1 and the role of the OPTEL in satisfying criteria 2 and 3. Our field experts will share strategies for successful reclassification, addressing the unique needs of EL students, including those with a disability. And we'll conclude by providing you with a wealth of resources to support your reclassification efforts moving forward. Before we dive in to the content of the webinar, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our presenters. Each of our presenters brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in supporting English learners and navigating the reclassification process. Their diverse backgrounds and roles will provide us with a comprehensive view of reclassification, from policy to practice. I'm now going to pass it over to GQ Dlamini, who oversees the Language Policy and Leadership Office at the California Department of Education.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Good afternoon to our educators and our partners joining us today. My name is Reclassification Dlamini. I am the administrator of the Language Policy and Leadership Office in the Multilingual Support Division at the CDE. It is my pleasure to introduce the CDE team. Joining us today from our division and our office are Ashley Metcalf, who you've heard from, Gustavo Gonzalez, and Cristina Eccles-Golas. Additionally, we are grateful to have our partners from within the CDE. Today, we are joined by John Birch from the Special Education Division. John will provide insight into the services provided to our duly identified students. Also, we have Tracy Albee and Sharissa Kirk from the Assessment Development and Administration Division. Tracy will share information about California's English language proficiency assessments and accessibility resources as part of the reclassification process. These divisions and many others in the CDE play a crucial role in supporting our English learners through their educational journey, including the reclassification process. I also want to take a moment to thank our colleagues who are providing American Sign Language, Kamea Pike and Katie Pickard. Now that you've met your CDE team, let's hear from our partners. It is my pleasure to introduce Graciela Garcia Torres, Director of Multilingual Education, Regional English Learner Especialista, and EPIC Lead from the Sacramento County Office of Education to say hello. Good afternoon, Graciela.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Buenas tardes. I'm Graciela Garcia Torres, like GQ said, Director of Multilingual Education and a Regional English Learner Specialist of Region 3 with the Sacramento County Office of Education. I also lead the English Learner Roadmap Power in collaboration across California, known as the EPIC Grant, which focuses on empowering educators and supporting our multilingual English learners on effective language acquisition programs. I'm thrilled to be here today to share insights for supporting our multilingual English learner students in best practices for reclassification.
Thank you so much, Graciela. We're so glad you're here. Now let's meet our next presenter, who brings expertise in supporting duly identified students. Vanessa Lopez from the Imperial County Office of Education serves as the coordinator of inclusive practices and coordinator of Project Muse, improving outcomes for multilingual students with exceptional needs. Vanessa, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. So very happy to be here. My name is Vanessa Lopez, as GQ shared with you, and I am joining you from the Imperial County for Imperial County SELPA. The Imperial County SELPA was awarded as part of a special education resource lead, where our focus area is developing supports, tools, and resources for practitioners who are serving students who are dually identified, meaning multilingual students with exceptional needs. It is a pleasure to be here and to join you this afternoon. GQ?
Thank you so much, Vanessa. We are so honored to have your expertise here with us today. And before I turn it over to our director, I just want to honor and recognize all of our educators who are asking for the slides. We're so excited to see this energy, and we look forward to sharing this recording, as well as the slides and the many resources you're going to hear about in the near future. With that, it's my pleasure now to introduce our fearless leader in the Multilingual Support Division and our director, Alicia Moreno Ramirez. Good afternoon, Alicia.
Good afternoon. Thank you, GQ, and welcome to you all. I'm Alicia Moreno Ramirez, proud director of the MIC team here at the California Department of Education. We sincerely extend our heartfelt gratitude to each of you for joining us today. Your presence is a testament to the importance of the reclassification process for the 2024-25 school year and beyond, and the maintenance of the promise of California's exit criteria. California's vision for multilingual students is to provide a world-class education that closes the achievement and opportunity gaps for all migratory, immigrant, and multilingual students, including our English learner classified students and dual language learners, preparing them to live, work, and thrive in a multicultural world. The CDE is deeply committed to this vision, and we appreciate your partnership as we all collectively bring this vision into implementation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a true champion of multilingual learners, Deputy Superintendent of the Opportunities for All branch, Sarah Neville Morgan, who oversees the multilingual support, expanded learning, early education, special education, and nutrition services division. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Alicia. So, hello everyone, good afternoon. I am really delighted to be here with all of you as California works with our education partners like yourselves in support of multilingual learners. As someone who spent the first 5 years of my life in Venezuela and then Peru, I understand critically the importance of supporting home language and acquisition of second languages such as English. The CDE Opportunities for All branch is characterized by a constellation of integrated programs and services for our students, inclusive of our over 1 million English learners who strive towards reclassification. From nutritious meals to high-quality early learning experiences, including universal meals and universal pre-K, innovative expanded learning opportunities, and essential services such as special education, migrant education, and multilingual programs, California truly takes a whole child approach to supporting our students, transforming our schools, and celebrating multilingualism. Today's webinar is intended to support educators, parents, and all of our education partners and understanding statewide English learner reclassification expectations. You will also hear about the observation protocol for teachers of English learners, or OPTAL. As part of reclassification, this validated tool will provide consistent experiences for all English learner students and further strengthens California's path towards standardization as required by federal law. So in the coming slides, Alicia will share about the English Learner or EL Roadmap policy. The EL Roadmap documents California's mission to ensure schools affirm, welcome, and respond to a diverse range of student strengths, needs, and identities. Further, EL Roadmap implementation can guide local approaches to preparing graduates with the linguistic, academic, and social skills and competencies necessary for a thriving future in a global, diverse, and multilingual world. Your participation today is reflective of the commitment we share in providing multilingual learners with a world-class education that closes the opportunity and achievement gaps. Thank you to Sacramento County Office of Education, Imperial County Special Education Local Planning Agency, and our CDE team, including the MSD Language Policy and Leadership Office, for designing today's webinar on this important topic. We are so lucky to have this area led by Alicia Moreno Ramirez, and in this instance, be partnered with leadership from GQ. And on behalf of the CDE, thank you all for joining us. I will now pass back to Alicia.
Thank you so much, Sarah. If this topic of reclassification is not a topic reflective of perseverance, I don't know what is. So it seems very appropriate that everyone persevered and was able to get back online. Thank you so much. We appreciate your leadership and service to California's diverse learners. Now that we've introduced our expert panel, let's begin by grounding our conversation in our understanding of reclassification within the broader context of California's English Learner Roadmap. The slide that you see in front of you shares a vision from the EL Roadmap that encapsulates our vision for all English learner students in California. Our vision is for all EL students, including dually identified students, to fully and meaningfully access and participate in a 21st century education from early childhood through grade 12 and beyond that results in their attainment of high levels of English proficiency, mastery of grade level standards, and opportunity to develop proficiency in multiple languages. The EL Roadmap is built on 4 key principles, and we'll see those on the next slide. These principles guide our approach to supporting English learner students through their educational journey, including the reclassification process. So let's briefly review these principles. Principle 1, Assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools really centers the learner. Principle 2, intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access ensures intellectual rigor and stimulation. Principle 3, system conditions that support effectiveness ensure we're coordinating. And alignment and articulation within and across systems ensures that we are attentive to higher level articulation vertically and horizontally. In the chat, you'll find a link to obtain more information about the California English Learner Roadmap. You can visit the CDE's EL Roadmap webpage using the link in the chat. And while all 4 principles are crucial for supporting English learner students, we'll be focused framing our presentation today through principles 3 and 4. So let's delve into principle 3 of the English Learner Roadmap policy. So on this next slide, you'll see systems conditions that support effectiveness and how this principle connects to the reclassification process. The key idea here is that effective reclassification practices require robust, coordinated systems and policies that support the equitable, consistent, and fair application of reclassification criteria across classrooms, schools, and districts. This principle highlights the need for systemic support to ensure that all EL students can be reclassified upon meeting the criteria. Some questions to consider when implementing Principle 3 are, we have clear, well-documented procedures for reclassification in our district? Or are all relevant staff members trained in these procedures? Or do we have protocols in place to ensure consistency across different schools or classrooms? And how do we support educators in making informed decisions about reclassification? In the chat, you should see these reflection questions documented for your reference as you plan around implementation of Principle 3. And as you hear from our presenters today, please keep these questions in mind, as well as the concept of our systems conditions that support equitable, consistent, and fair application of reclassification criteria. We'll explore some specific tools and practices that can help strengthen these systems conditions. The OPTEL, which we'll discuss just a little bit later, is one such tool that can support consistency in our reclassification practices. So let's go next to Principle 4. Principle 4 of the English Learner Roadmap, alignment and articulation within and across systems, is key when we consider reclassification in the broader context of an EL student's educational journey. The key message here is that reclassification is not an isolated event. It's part of a continuous process that should align with other educational practices and policies across different levels of the education system. This also entails the articulation and coordination of voices and perspectives working in tandem in service to English learner students. Think vertical alignment, horizontal alignments across different subject areas and programs within a school or district, and cross-system alignment. This principle reminds us of a shared and collective responsibility to EL students, and I think that's reflected in our panel today. Some questions to consider when implementing Principle 4 are as follows. How do our reclassification processes align with our overall EL instructional program? Are our reclassification criteria consistent with our expectations for English proficiency in different academic subjects? Or for dually identified students, how do we ensure alignment between EL and special education services and education? And how do we maintain continuity in supporting students post-reclassification? In the chat, you should now see these additional reflection questions documented for your reference with respect to Principle 4 as you forward in your implementation. This principle also reminds us of the importance of communication and collaboration across different parts of the education system. Teachers, EL program coordinators, special education specialists, administrators, and other interest holders should share this responsibility and this understanding of the reclassification process and its place in the broader educational context. Thank you again for attending today to learn more about reclassification. Now I will turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you, Alicia. Now that we've grounded our understanding of reclassification and the EL roadmap principles, let's take a closer look at California's multilingual student population. California is home to 5.8 million students. Of these, 2.3 million students, which is nearly 40% of California's total student population, bring an asset of a home language other than English to our schools. When we break it down even further, we see that 1.1 million, or 19%, are currently identified as EL students. This is the largest population of EL students in the nation. 1.2 million are either identified as initially English proficient, or IFA, or have been reclassified as fluent English proficient, or ARFA. Of the 799,980 students with disabilities in grades TK through 12, 187,756, or 25%, are EL students with disabilities. A closer examination of the data reveals that 10.6% of EL students with disabilities were reclassified, compared to 16.7% of EL students without disabilities. This disparity underscores our collective responsibility to implement effective and consistent reclassification processes across the state. In case you're curious, that data was pulled from DataQuest on September 20th, 2024. Now that we've grounded our discussion in the EL roadmap and examined the current landscape of English learner students in California, let's turn our attention to the specific services provided to our EL students, including those who are duly identified. Understanding these services is crucial as it provides context for the support EL students receive on their journey towards reclassification. Before we explore services, however, let's establish a common understanding of who English learners are. EL students are those who enroll in a California school at any grade level, kindergarten through grade 12, have a language other than English identified on the Home Language Survey, and upon assessment, demonstrate a level of English language proficiency, or ELP, that indicates EL programs and services are necessary. Students identified as English learners receive programs and services, including integrated and designated English language development, or ELD, until they meet the reclassification criteria pursuant to California Education Code, or EC, Section 313. So what are language acquisition programs? Title V, California Code of Regulations, or CCR, Section 11300D, requires that EL students must receive language acquisition programs that lead to English acquisition as rapidly and effectively as possible. And that instruction must be aligned with both academic content and ELD standards. What are the requirements for language acquisition programs? In addition to state regulations, our language acquisition programs are guided by federal case law, specifically Castañeda versus Pickard, tried in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit and decided in 1981. Based on the final ruling, LEAs have a dual obligation to provide, number one, a program designed to overcome language barriers, and number two, meaningful access to the core curriculum. This landmark case established a three-pronged test for evaluating the adequacy of a district's program for EL students. California codified the test into the Education Code. The three-part test establishes that language acquisition programs should, one, be designed using evidence-based research and include both designated and integrated ELD. Two, be allocated sufficient resources by LEAs to be effectively implemented, including but not limited to certificated teachers with the appropriate authorizations, necessary instructional materials, pertinent professional development for the proposed program, and opportunities for parent and community engagement to support the proposed program goals. And three, within a reasonable period of time, lead to grade level proficiency in English and the achievement of the state adopted academic content standards in English. And when the program model includes instruction in another language, proficiency in the other language and achievement of the state adopted academic content standards in that other language. These legal requirements and standards provide a framework for designing and implementing our EL programs, including our reclassification processes. As we discuss specific reclassification criteria later, please keep these requirements in mind. Our reclassification practices should align with these legal standards, ensuring that we're supporting rapid and effective English acquisition while maintaining high academic standards. This leads us to our next topic, services for duly identified students. I will now hand it over to John.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm John Birch, an administrator with the Special Education Division at the CDE. Duly identified students are students identified as English learners who are also children with disabilities under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's important to emphasize that these students are entitled to all services and supports for both categories, as students with disabilities and as English learners. So let's break this down a little bit. First, services for students with disabilities. Duly identified students are entitled to an individual education program or a Section 504 plan, depending on their specific needs. 2, they have the right to inclusion and a free appropriate public education, or FAPE. 3, they must be educated in the least restrictive environment appropriate for their needs. Now, they also are entitled to services as English learners. So these students are also entitled to all EL services, including 1, integrated English language development, ELD, across all subject areas. 2, designated ELD instruction. 3, participation in the annual English language proficiency assessment. 4, duly identified students have the same goal and expectation of reclassification as all other EL students. When considering reclassification for duly identified students, we must, 1, ensure that IEP or 504 plan goals align with and support progress toward reclassification. 2, consider how a student's disability might suggest the need for support in meeting the criteria. And 3, involve both EL specialists and special education professionals in the reclassification decision-making process. With this understanding of the services provided to both general EL students and students with disabilities, let's now turn our attention to the specifics of the reclassification process. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague and send it back to GQ. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. We are so grateful for your partnership and the Special Education Division's deep partnership as our divisions collaborate to meet the needs of our duly identified students here in California. So far, we've established the context for EL education in California, including the legal requirements, services provided, and special considerations for duly identified students. Now let's take a deep dive into California's reclassification process and criteria. Remember, the goal of these criteria is not just to comply with regulations, but to ensure that our EL students are truly ready to succeed in an English instruction without specialized language support. We'll also discuss how tools like the Optel can support us in applying these criteria more equitably and consistently. And our hope is by the end of this next section, you should have a comprehensive understanding of the reclassification process, each reclassification criterion, and feel confident in applying them in your local context. So let's just review reclassification. So reclassification is the process whereby a student is reclassified from EL status to RFEP status. Reclassification can take place at any time during the academic year, immediately upon the student meeting all the criteria. As a reminder, each LEA locally establishes the reclassification process, including any documents, communications, and information regarding that process. In setting reclassification procedures, there is a requirement for parent engagement in California, and it's outlined in Title V of the California Code of Regulations, Section 11308C6, titled Advisory Committee. It adds a crucial layer to this process. These regulations specify that any reclassification procedures or criteria must be reviewed by a school district committee on programs and services for English learner students. This committee is typically the District English Learner Advisory Committee, or DLAC. The requirement for committee review ensures that multiple perspectives are considered when setting reclassification procedures and criteria, and emphasizes the necessary role of parents and guardians as educational partners. It also provides a check against any biases and helps ensure that the criteria are fair and appropriate for the local student population. There are 4 required criteria in California. The first of those being assessment of English language proficiency, or ELP, with the summative English language proficiency assessments for California, or LPAC, or the summative alternate LPAC. The second criterion is teacher evaluation, and the third, parent opinion and consultation, and the fourth is basic skills relative to English proficient students. Each of these criteria plays a role in the comprehensive reclassification process, and we'll explore each in depth in the upcoming slides. As we discuss each criterion, keep in mind how they work together to provide a holistic view of a student's readiness for reclassification. Also note that each LEA must have criteria for all students in all grades it enrolls, giving all students a chance for reclassification. Now let's begin our examination, our detailed examination, with the first criterion, assessment of English language proficiency. And now I'll welcome my colleague, Tracy Elby, to discuss that one.
Thank you, GQ. Criterion 1 is the assessment of English language proficiency. It's the state and federal law that requires that all LEAs must administer a state of English language proficiency to eligible students in kindergarten through grade 12. So as previously said, this assessment occurs annually during our assessment window, and California Education Code 313, Section F1 outlines the requirement for the criterion 1. In the following slides, we'll examine the specific assessments used for the summative LPAC and the summative alternate LPAC, the proficiency levels required for reclassification, considerations for different student populations, and including duly identified students. Let's begin by looking at the specifics for the summative LPAC. So there are 2 tests that make up the summative English language proficiency assessments for California, and both assess the students' listening, speaking, reading, and writing domains. The summative LPAC measures how well English learner students are progressing with English language development in each of the 4 domains. LEAs shall use the LPAC, the statewide standardized ELP, as the criteria for English learner students assessed that take the summative LPAC. All students with an LPAC overall performance level of a score of 4 are eligible to be considered for reclassification. Under the very rare circumstances when a student's disability precludes assessment in 1 or more domains of the summative LPAC, the student's results are based on the domains that are completed, and no penalty is given for the exempted domain as long as the other domain within the composite is completed. The student may be reclassified with an overall performance level of 4, even with domain exemptions. The second summative assessment of ELP is the summative alternate LPAC, which provides information on students' annual progress, again, towards ELP for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. LEA shall use the summative alternate LPAC overall performance level of 3 as the statewide standardized ELP criterion for English learner students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. All students with a summative alternate LPAC overall performance level score of 3 are eligible to be considered for reclassification. Before May 2023, when the State Board of Education officially approved a summative alternate LPAC overall performance level 3 as the statewide standardized score for satisfy reclassification criteria 1, individualized education programs or IEP team were able to make decisions around how students with the most significant disabilities could satisfy criterion 1. That is no longer the case. The alternate LPAC replaces all locally determined alternate assessments and provides a consistent, standardized measurement of ELP across the state for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities as required by federal and state law. There are no domain exemptions for the alternate LPAC as the test integrates the domains of reading and listening into receptive items and speaking and writing into expressive items. Additionally, students may use their preferred modes of communication to respond to items, including the use of picture cards and manipulatives to support a student's individualization. The LPAC provides a full range of assessment accessibility resources for all students to use, including English learner students with disabilities. Some accessibility resources are embedded into the test delivery system, while other resources are considered non-embedded since they are provided by the local educational agency or LEA. There are 4 categories of student accessibility resources when taking the LPAC. These 4 categories include universal tools, designated support, and accommodations, otherwise known as UDAs, as well as unlisted resources. Universal tools are available to all students on the basis of student preference and selection, and they are readily available within the test delivery system or upon request by the student locally. Designated supports are available to all students when determined for use by an educator or team of educators with parent, guardian, and student input as appropriate, or specified in the student's individualized education program or IEP or Section 504 plan. Accommodations must be permitted on both CASP and LPAC tests to all eligible students if specified in the student's IEP or Section 504 plan. Unlisted resources are non-embedded and shall be made available if specified in the eligible student's IEP or Section 504 plan, and only on approval by this California Department of Education via our Test Operation Management System or TOMS. The first 3 categories, or as I said, UDAs, if assigned, used, do not change the construct of what is being assessed. In addition, there is no penalty or negative impact to the LEA or student when assigning any of these accessibility resources to a student. And there will be no negative impact on their score as a result of using any of these UDAs. For unlisted resources, the last category that CDE reviews and approves each request to determine if there is a change in the test construct being measured. If the unlisted resources changes the construct being measured, then the student will be automatically assigned the lowest obtainable scale score for that domain, but will still be counted as participating. To assist the field in understanding more about these types of accessibility resources available, we have the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix document. This document displays the embedded and non-embedded UDAs allowed for both the CASP and the LPAC. They are specific to each assessment and they do not always apply to each assessment. So make sure that you review that information closely. To further assist LEAs, the matrix also provides a list of pre-identified unlisted resources that have been determined to change the construct being measured on the LPAC. Students should be allowed to have these if they are identified in their IEPs. You can find the matrix on the CDE's website, and the link is provided, will be provided in the chat. This document is a great resource, and we recommend keeping a copy handy at all times when preparing to administer the LPAC. Another great resource for LEAs is to be sure to access the LPAC information guide, which is now available in HTML format on the CASP and LPAC website. This resource provides LEAs with specific guidance on LPAC administration for all students, including those with disabilities. Additionally, it provides detailed information on when domain exemptions are appropriate and includes sample scenarios for each domain. LEAs can access the link to the initial and summative LPAC domain exemption decision-making tool in the guide. This resource assists them in determining if an English learner student or potential English learner student has a disability that precludes them from meaningfully participation in one or more of the initial LPAC or summative LPAC domains. For example, speaking, listening, reading, or writing. As noted previously, in order for a score to be produced for a student, they may only have one domain exemption in each composite. So for oral language, they could be exempted from listening or speaking. And for written language, they can be exempted from reading or writing. Additional resources regarding duly identified students are also available in the guide. Please be sure to check out this helpful resource when looking for guidance when assessing students on the LPAC. I am now going to hand it back to Ashley.
Thank you, Tracy. Now that we've covered the standardized assessment of English language proficiency, let's turn our attention to the second criterion in their classification process, teacher evaluation. California Education Code, Section 313F2, outlines the requirement for criterion 2. In the following slides, we'll explore the importance of teacher evaluation in the reclassification process, tools and strategies for conducting effective teacher evaluations, and how to ensure consistency and objectivity in teacher evaluation. Criterion 2 is teacher evaluation, and it is required for all LEAs. Here are some important items to keep in mind. First, there is the legal requirement. Title 5, California Code of Regulations, or CCR, Section 11303B, mandates the participation of specific educators in the reclassification process. This includes the pupil's classroom teacher and any other certificated staff with direct responsibility for teaching or placement decisions of the pupil. This requirement ensures that those who work most closely with the student have a voice in the reclassification decision. We also have practice considerations. Consider designing this process to be efficient and focused. It should be short to ensure that it's not overly burdensome for teachers. It should be focused on support and mastery, looking at the student's current performance and needs. It should be specific to each student, recognizing that every EL student's journey is unique. And it should be current, concentrating on the student's performance in the current school year. Finally, we have the comprehensive view. By involving multiple educators, we get a more comprehensive view of the student's abilities across different subjects and contexts. This aligns with our earlier discussion of integrated ELD. We're looking at language proficiency as it applies across the curriculum. Consider the following. How can you make the experience more consistent and give students an equitable chance across classrooms? How can you make the process efficient while still gathering meaningful data? And how will you ensure all relevant teachers have input? Remember, the goal is to complement the standardized assessment data with informed professional judgment about the student's grade level language use in the classroom and readiness for reclassification. Next, we'll look at the state recommended tool for implementing effective teacher evaluations for reclassification criterion 2, which is the OPTEL. The California State Board of Education, or SBE, unanimously approved the OPTEL to satisfy criteria 2, teacher evaluation, and 3, parent consultation, in November 2023. The OPTEL is designed to promote equity in the reclassification process, which aligns with our commitment to be equitable, consistent, and have fair practices for all EL students. So what is the purpose of the OPTEL? The OPTEL is an observation protocol that supports educators in monitoring and evaluating the academic language use of EL students. It's designed and scientifically validated to meet the requirements set out in California Education Code, Section 313.3. It ensures that our practices are legally compliant. The OPTEL has a focus on equity. By providing a standardized protocol, the OPTEL helps reduce potential biases in the evaluation process. It ensures that all EL students, regardless of their background or which teacher is evaluating them, are assessed using consistent criteria. Additionally, the OPTEL provides a comprehensive evaluation. The OPTEL focuses on academic language use across multiple subject areas. It can involve multiple educators and can support teacher collaboration to support student success, which aligns again with our integrated ELD approach, looking at language proficiency in the context of academic content. The OPTEL tool is available on the CDE OPTEL webpage, making it easily accessible to all educators in California. Importantly, some LEAs may already have access to the OPTEL through their Student Information System platform. This integration can streamline the evaluation process. The CDE strongly recommends that LEAs transition to using the OPTEL for their local reclassification processes. This recommendation is part of California's efforts to strengthen the standardization of reclassification criteria. This move towards standardization aligns with the requirements in Title III, Part A of the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's part of the state's ongoing effort to ensure equity and consistency in how we serve our EL students in alignment with the EL roadmap. Now, we understand that implementing a new tool can be challenging, and so that is why the CDE has developed a comprehensive set of resources to support OPTEL implementation. First, we have professional learning modules that provide in-depth training on how to use the OPTEL effectively. We have an OPTEL user guide that offers step-by-step instruction for using the tool. There are webinars, which provide opportunities for real-time learning and Q&A about the OPTEL. And of course, there's frequently asked questions that address common concerns and queries about OPTEL implementation. On your screen, you will also see the blue and yellow OPTEL logo used throughout the learning modules. Remember, the goal of the OPTEL and these supporting resources is to enhance the quality and consistency of teacher evaluations, ultimately leading to more equitable reclassification decisions. As we move forward, please consider how you might integrate the OPTEL into your current processes. Now that we've covered the assessment of English language proficiency and teacher evaluation, let's turn our attention to the third criterion in the reclassification process, parent opinion and consultation. California Education Code, Section 313F3, sets forth the requirement for Criterion 3. In the following slide, we'll explore the legal requirements for parent consultation in the reclassification process and how the OPTEL can satisfy this criterion. Let's start by looking at the specific legal requirements for parent involvement in the reclassification process, as outlined in 5 CCR Section 11303C. This regulation mandates two key aspects of parental involvement. First, there is the notice to parents or guardians. LEAs must provide notice to parents or guardians about language reclassification and placement. This notice must include a description of the reclassification process. Importantly, it must also inform parents of their opportunity to participate in the process. This ensures that parents are not just informed, but are aware of their right to be actively involved in the process. Next, there is the encouragement of parent participation. LEAs are required to encourage participation of parents or guardians in the reclassification procedure. This includes actively seeking their opinion and consultation during the process. This goes beyond mere notification. It's about creating opportunities for meaningful engagement. LEAs can consult with parents of students who are being considered for reclassification by phone, school platforms, or other available technology to discuss eligibility. Through this process, parents can voice any concerns or share goals they may have for their child's likely reclassification and education path. The parent consultation form on page 3 of the OPTEL tool is designed to standardize the process and guide educators in consultation with parents of EL students regarding their progress toward English proficiency as part of the reclassification process. Resources to support OPTEL implementation for Criterion 3 includes a sample parent script. This optional sample resource for using the OPTEL supports parent consultation meetings to discuss student progress towards reclassification. Other resources include the OPTEL user guide, professional learning modules, and frequently asked questions, which I have previously discussed. As a reminder, the SBE unanimously approved the OPTEL to satisfy criteria 2, teacher evaluation, and 3, parent consultation. The CDE, again, strongly recommends that LEAs transition to the OPTEL for local reclassification processes as California strengthens the standardization of reclassification. And now I'll turn it over to GQ to cover Criterion 4.
Thank you so much, Ashley. So let's examine Criterion 4 basic skills relative to English proficient students and how this comparison is made. A key point to note is that the measure used for the comparison of EL student performance to that of native English-speaking students is locally determined. This allows LEAs to consider their specific student populations and contexts. As stated in Education Code, Section 313F4, this comparison demonstrates whether the student is sufficiently proficient in English to participate effectively in a curriculum designed for pupils of the same age whose native language is English. LEAs have the responsibility to establish the empirical range of performance and basic skills when setting their reclassification criteria. This allows for flexibility in considering local factors and your student population. When setting these criteria, LEAs must consider the overall achievement goals for all students. This ensures that the expectations of EL students align with our broader educational objectives. It's also important to note that while the criterion involves comparison, it's not about holding EL students to a higher standard. Rather, it's about ensuring they have the grade level skills needed to succeed alongside their English proficient peers. For all grade levels, LEAs can use the most recent local benchmark assessments, the Smarter Balanced Summative English Language Arts Assessment, or the California Alternate Assessments for ELA. Again, the measures must be empirical and taken by both native English speaking students and EL students. Next slide, please. And just to reiterate, this comparison of the student performance must be to that of native English speaking students and demonstrate whether the pupil is proficient or sufficiently proficient in English to participate effectively. And lastly, the LEA must maintain that empirical range of performance. Next slide, please. So on your screen are the definitions of related terms to the slide, which may be helpful when LEAs establish the empirical range of performance in basic skills while locally setting determinations for criterion 4. Performance in basic skills. This refers to the score or performance level resulting from a recent administration of an objective assessment in basic skills in English. Examples, as I mentioned, include the Smarter Balanced Assessments or the district benchmarks. The key here is that the assessment must be objective and recent, providing an accurate picture of the student's current skill. Moving on to range of performance in basic skills. This is defined as a range of scores on the assessment of basic skills in English that corresponds to a performance level or a range within a performance level. This range should be empirically established and based on the performance of English proficient students in your local context. And lastly, students of the same age. For the purpose of this comparison, we're looking at English proficient students who are enrolled in the same grade as the student being considered for reclassification. This ensures we're making a fair comparison, taking into account age-appropriate expectations. And so now we've reviewed all 4 criteria, and that concludes our review. We gave you an in-depth review of Criterion 1, our English Language Proficiency Assessment, and then we reviewed Criterion 2 and 3, sharing information about the OPTEL, and now we've concluded by sharing a little information about Criterion 4, that comparison of basic skills. And now we want to share a reminder regarding progress monitoring for students. After students have exited the EL program through the locally approved reclassification process, LEAs must monitor the academic progress of those RFEP students for at least 4 years to ensure that the students have not been prematurely exited from the program. Any academic deficits they incurred as a result of learning English have been remedied, and the students meaningfully participate in the standard instructional program, which is comparable to their English-only peers. Academic supports, including ELD services, may be provided to a student during the RFEP monitoring as needed. English language proficiency and the ability to participate meaningfully are the promise of California's exit criteria. Again, now that we've covered our 4 criterion for reclassification and their legal foundations, let's now turn our attention to best practices for implementing these criteria effectively. Understanding the requirements is crucial, but knowing how to apply them in real-world situations is equally as important. To guide us through these best practices, I'm pleased to again welcome our colleague from the Sacramento County Office of Education, Graciela.
Thank you, GQ. Let's look at best practices for reclassification of English learners into fluent English proficiency. This means that the student will move from needing light language acquisition support to occasional support. Once reclassified, students need to be monitored for the next 4 years, as GQ said. In the best practices, we have seen the English Learner Roadmap at work. We know that the 4 principles are interrelated. So even though we are focusing on Principle 3 for best practices on reclassification, we know that the other principles must be part of the system's conditions that support effectiveness, which includes a systemic approach, structured collaboration, a communicated system, and offer clear guided choices. Let's start with what we mean by a systemic approach and collaboration. A systemic approach requires a cohesive system integrating language acquisition, content, and as appropriate special education needs. Establishing clear, consistent procedures for reclassifying English learner students includes those with exceptional needs. It is a crucial step. This comprehensive reclassification policy, aligned with state and locally determined guidelines, provides a sense of security and reassurance. It includes precise data collection and data analysis protocols for comprehensive data-driven decision-making, ensuring timely reclassification. Clear procedures and collaboration ensure consistency. In a 2-year cross-county collaboration project with systems thinking, we found that reclassification is known predominantly to the multilingual EL departments, even if procedures exist without collaboration. The system fails to be responsive to English learners in this case. Promote collaboration, for example, between the EL specialist and special education teams. Encourage joint decision-making processes that address the unique needs of duly identified students. Have a process map showing the steps into reclassification, which includes the multiple departments that need communication for timely reclassification. This includes fostering educator collaboration across content areas and grade levels who know and understand the implication of classroom practices that influence timely preparedness in language acquisition and access to the content knowledge requirements to meet the demands in order to reclassify. Involve parents and guardians in the reclassification process through the English Learner Advisory Committees like the ELAC and the DLAC. Lastly, engage students in self-assessment and goal setting are all aspects of systems and collaborative processes into exiting English learner status. A systemic approach must also include collaboration and a clear communication pathway. Communicate the reclassification criteria and process to families, staff to ensure transparency and understanding. Have a system to provide ongoing updates on student progress, ensuring all understand the requirements and process and plan to support students moving forward towards meeting exit criteria. Teachers need appropriate professional development in integrated and designated English language development that includes understanding the English language development standards and the correlation to the content standards, LPAC task types, accommodations, universal supports, modifications, and the reclassification criteria. Possibility of choice. Empower families and students with choices regarding program options available, supports, pathways, and support structures in the system. Tailor reclassification options to fit individual needs, offering the services available for students to perform optimally, such as accommodations and modifications, universal supports, designated supports. This individualized approach is not just a strategy, but a testament to our commitment to valuing and considering each student's unique needs. Develop personalized reclassification plans that are part of the collaboration and system, especially at the middle and high school levels, involve the students. So what are best practices in terms of the 4 criteria? The English language proficiency, or the ELP, is consistent statewide. This is the LPAC. So determining the best pathway for the student to meet English language proficiency is essential, ensuring that it aligns with state and local guidelines. For students with an IEP, it is important to delineate the steps of action between the English learner and the special education systems to respond to the unique needs of the dually identified students. Provide necessary universal tools, designated supports, accommodations, and modifications, such as visual aids or extra time, to ensure equitable preparedness for the participation in the educational system for all students. And closely monitor the progress of LPAC for timely reclassification. Teacher evaluation. Progress monitoring data should guide teacher evaluation of EL students' readiness, tracking, language development, and academic progress, ensuring teachers have the right tools to assess and recognize each student's growth. Collect and review student work samples to provide evidence of language and academic growth that supports student reclassification decisions. A systemic approach gives concrete choices of the criteria for the teacher evaluation, such as a rubric that is aligned to the ELD standards. Parent consultation, parent opinion and consultation. Meaningful parent involvement is critical in reclassification throughout the year and not only waiting until it's time to reclassify. For example, having a recognition celebration for students reclassifying will not only give information, but uplift the hard work it takes to meet the criteria. Lastly, basic skills relative to English proficient students. Clearly outline the system of options available to meet the basic skills criterion. Include multiple measures, opportunities to allow flexibility and accuracy in evaluating a student's basic skills relative to their English proficient peers. Ensure the reclassification criteria are tailored to grade level standards, providing an equitable comparison to peers and recognizing each student's progress. Examine possible biases in making the criteria too high, with the understanding that reclassified students are monitored for 4 years. So, in reviewing best practices, we truly see the English Learner Roadmap come to life. The 4 principles of the roadmap are interconnected. And while today we've highlighted Principle 3, system conditions that support effectiveness, it's essential to weave in the other principles as well. Principle 3 reminds us of the importance of a systemic approach, structured collaboration, clear communication, and providing students with guided choices. By embracing this holistic approach, we can ensure timely reclassification for our multilingual English learner students and their continued growth. Now I am going to pass it over to my colleague Vanessa from Imperial County to speak on their expertise on best practices for dually identified students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graciela. Thank you for introducing best practices on reclassification for English learner students. So I'm going to start by spending some time exploring the following bullet points that you see before you on these slides. It's important for teams to become familiar with the student's primary eligibility category and how it manifests across language domains and language composites. It's also important that if an additional disability or disabilities exist, that we consider how these two intersect and manifest across language domains and language composites. Reclassification team members are encouraged to connect with the student's case manager, special education teacher for access to this information. Though not required, it is considered best practice to have members of the IEP team present or at least involved around reclassification conversations. Additionally, school psychologists, speech language pathologists, and any other individuals that have direct contact with students may provide insights into how it is that dually identified students are accessing academic content and language needs. On our next slide, we are going to take a deeper look as to how to best support dually identified students in showing what they know through the use of accommodations and the development and implementation of linguistically appropriate goals and objectives. So in continuing with our conversation around best practices for dually identified students, let's start by exploring accommodations. So accommodations aren't just turned on for statewide assessment. Testing accommodations are part of the student's daily instruction and are provided across academic contexts for generalization. Student voice is important and critical as part of the accommodation selection process. It is important for us to remember that accommodations must be taught and practiced. Ample time and opportunity to practice the use of accommodations to determine its appropriateness for the student and the task is key. Another required element that figures largely here in best practices are linguistically appropriate goals and objectives, aka LAGOs. So linguistically appropriate goals and objectives must be aligned to the student's English language proficiency level with the appropriate linguistic supports, whether they be light, moderate, or substantial. And consideration should be given by domain. If the student participates in alternate assessments, goals and instruction are aligned to the alternate achievement standards, the core content connectors. It is important for us to remember that goals and instruction are aligned to these standards. We will also continue looking a little bit deeper now into how it is that we can continue with best practices for dually identified students. For students with an active IEP or a 504 plan, during IEP meetings for dually identified students, it is highly encouraged to utilize the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix to guide team discussions and determine which universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations would best support individual student needs by domain for the LPAC. I cannot highlight that enough. It is important for us to consider how it is that we're going to be utilizing these UDAs, not just overall, but by domain, with information from the case manager, the general education teacher, and any other direct or indirect service providers that have insight as to how the student is developing language-wise and the manifestation of their disability. It is important for us to remember that when we are talking about best practices for dually identified students, specifically students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, that we are making a series of confirmations where we are indicating that the student should be assessed with an alternate assessment. During IEPT meetings for dually identified students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, the alternate assessment participation decision-making tool is a great tool to guide team discussions and determinations of statewide assessment participation for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. We are confirming thus that when a student is eligible to take the alternate assessment, that a disability exists and that it significantly impacts intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. We are also confirming that the student's goals and instruction are aligned to the core content connectors. And finally, we are confirming that this student requires extensive, repeated, individualized instruction and support that is not of a temporary nature, and that the student uses substantially adapted materials and individualized methods of accessing information in alternative ways to either acquire, maintain, generalize, demonstrate, and transfer skills across academic content. So next, we're going to discuss best practices for dually identified students where domain exemptions may be appropriate. Okay, so for students with an IEP or a 504 plan where a domain exemption is being considered, it is important that during IEP team meetings for these dually identified students, teams utilize the domain exemption worksheet to guide team discussions and determinations if a domain exemption or domain exemptions are appropriate should the team determine that assessing a particular domain is tantamount to assessing that disability. I'll say that last part again. To guide team discussions and determination if a domain exemption or domain exemptions, multiple domains, are appropriate should the team determine that assessing a particular domain is tantamount to assessing the disability. What does that mean? Well, here's an example. Examples of disabilities that may require exemption may be those for a student who has been deaf since birth and is not able to participate in the listening or speaking domain of the LPAC because of the disability. Or perhaps a student who is blind and is not yet able to read Braille and thus cannot participate in the reading or writing domains of the LPAC because of that disability. However, it is important to note that some situations where a domain exemption may be appropriate may not be as clear-cut as these two examples I just shared with you. So let's take a look at some recommendations for determining if a domain exemption or exemptions may be appropriate for other dually identified students. So in the rare circumstance, when a student has historically been unable to reach an overall proficiency level 4 occurs, there's a couple of bullet points that I want to focus your attention on here. The first one is, we must confirm consistent provision of quality comprehensive ELD, both integrated and designated over the years. That's our starting point. We must be able to confirm consistent provision of comprehensive ELD, designated and integrated over the years. Second, review of historical LPAC scores by domain. Third, reviewing the eligibility assessment results, the psychoeducational report, for insight into the manifestation of the disability or disabilities of multiple ones exist. We also want to consider and implement all possible combinations of universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations by domain on those remaining domains that are in fact accessible by the student. When we consider the points listed, we should be able to have evidence of how the dots connect to illustrate a scenario where a domain exemption may be appropriate, though not clearly evident on the surface level, or to individuals who do not have access or experience with understanding how the disability may manifest and impact not just the overall LPAC score, but those individual domains. The multidisciplinary team approach is critical when it comes to uncovering potential blind spots. The active participation of special education teachers and specialists in reclassification conversations is key, as well as the active participation of individuals with an ELD background to contribute to the discussion around linguistic supports embedded in LAGOS, linguistically appropriate goals and objectives. Multiple lenses and areas of expertise will allow teams to make domain exemption conversations more robust and nuanced. So let's take a look at how we can use these points to structure reflective conversations and/or interactions in alignment with a potential domain exemption. So here we are looking at a four-prong approach to domain exemption considerations. Number one, comprehensive ELD. Has there been consistent instruction in quality comprehensive ELD for both integrated and designated? Over the years, how do we know, and how is this ELD teacher or ELD teachers involved in this process? Number 2, the eligibility report, the psychoeducational assessment report. Are we clear on what the disability category is or are? Are we clear on how these disabilities manifest and intersect with language acquisition? Are we clear on how it impacts additional domains, speaking, listening, reading, writing? And are these tied to processing disorders that have a direct impact on these domains as well? Number 3, a historical review of LPAC scores by domain. Are there domains, or is there a domain or domains that are consistently depressing overall LPAC scores? Have all combinations of UDAs, universal tools, designated supports, accommodations, been exhausted in the impacted domain? Do these domains align with any identified processing disorders in the psychoeducational report? And over the years, have IEP teams with support from ELD teachers, TOSAs, and/or specialists identified linguistic supports aligned to those impacted language domains? And 4th, are linguistically appropriate goals and objectives. Have these linguistically appropriate goals and objectives been developed consistently with embedded language supports in the identified area of need? Were they developed with the student's English language proficiency in mind? By domain, as it relates to the identified area of need as identified in the IEP? Have these been consistently met? If not, what adjustments have been made? This will then take you through that step-by-step, prong-by-prong consideration if a domain exemption in an impacted domain as it relates to the disability may be appropriately exempted. Do we have proof of consistent comprehensive ELD? What is the disability category and/or categories? Are they linked to any processing disorders that are directly impacting one of the domains that is then assessing that particular disability? Are we going to exempt those domains and pad as much as possible those remaining domains with as many combinations of UDAs as we can come up with the support of the ELD specialist? And do we have proof that despite years of instruction and development of linguistically appropriate goals in these impacted areas, the student is unable to make progress? Then the team may come to consensus that, in fact, this domain is inaccessible to the student by measure of how their disability or disabilities manifest. I will now hand it back to Ashley.
Thank you, Vanessa. At this time, we will answer a few questions you have posted in the Q&A. Let's check in with GQ.
Firstly, thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you to Graciela and Vanessa for sharing that very important information and those best practices. We are so grateful to have their expertise, and I'm seeing a lot of love going their way. It is very, very, very much appreciated. We've received a lot of questions in our Q&A today, and unfortunately, we won't be able to address everything, but I just want to reiterate and share with you all, we plan to post this webinar for future reference so that you may share it with your teams, and we hope to have that up soon. As well as the slides, we intend to share these slides with you, and where possible, we'll work with our technical assistance providers to even give them some of our talking points so they can continue to support development at the local level. Another question I just wanted to answer and was asked, unfortunately, there's so many questions I can't see, but somebody asked, when will the Optel modules 4 through 9 be released? Well, today you received a couple of links there. I would implore you to go check out the LACO Optel Professional Learning modules at the link that will be provided in the chat. There is an opportunity there to sign up to be informed about when the modules are released. So please, please, please go do that and make sure you are informed. There's already, I believe, 4 modules that provide extensive, deep professional learning and are made for trainers, but can be picked up by just about anyone to support their development. So please check those out today. I also just want to let you know we've received a ton of questions in the Q&A. We will use these to inform our continued guidance development across all of the divisions that support English learners. I just shared with a colleague, we are blessed with work to do, and we look forward to doing that work to support you. So thank you. And if you have any additional questions, Ashley's going to, I believe, or is that mine? I'm going to share with you that you can send it to our email at lplo@cde.ca.gov. And you'll also receive an opportunity to add yourself to the multilingual listserv. And from there, you can receive updates, including on future webinars, where we hope to continue to address your questions and provide you with additional guidance. And with that, folks, I will now turn it back over to Ashley.
Thank you, GQ. Next slide, please. Before we close, we would like to share the link to the feedback survey for this webinar. Your feedback on today's webinar is very important, and it does help us improve our practice and to ensure that our future webinars meet your needs. A link to the survey will be provided in the chat. Next slide. Here are some links to CDE resources that you may find helpful. We've posted them throughout the chat today, but we will post them again here. And we also want to point out and emphasize something in the link called the resource guide, where we have every single resource listed that we have used along with some of the legalities. So I encourage you all to go straight for the resource guide there. Next slide, please. All right, so I just want to take a minute to thank all of our colleagues who presented and supported our webinar. Sarah Neville-Morgan, Alicia Moreno-Ramirez, GQ Dlamini, Gustavo Gonzalez, Emily Ingram, Christina Eccles-Goyas, John Birch, and Tracy Albee for their help in executing today's webinar. We'd also like to thank Graciela Garcia Torres and Vanessa Lopez for lending us their expertise on best practices today. On behalf of the administrators and staff of the CDE, as well as our partners at SCOE and IC SELPA, we thank you for joining us today. See you next time.